Good evening, friends. It's Friday, and I'm back with another tale from my collection, Dark Fragments. Now it's time to grab a snack, dim the lights, and let me take you into the night with a story I call Invader. Bart dropped his girlfriend off at home after a very boring date. She hadn't even kissed him goodnight at the door before going inside, and this annoyed him. It was just before midnight on Friday, and he wanted some action. He was cruising down the back roads by the prison when he remembered that tonight there was going to be an execution. He wondered what things were like there. So he drove around to the main road that led by the prison, stopping across the street from the main parking area. Several small groups of people gathered in the prison parking lot carrying signs protesting the execution, and television vans had set up to gather the spectacle. He looked at his watch and saw that it was almost midnight. Apparently the crowd realized this too, as the chanting became louder and they began to try to storm the gates of the prison. Then, as quickly as it started, the crowd calmed down and Bart saw them drop the signs as they trudged to their cars. On a tower near the gates, he could see a guard talking through a megaphone, so he lowered his window to hear what was said. "It's over, people. Go on home," the guard was repeating in a sullen, monotone voice. Bart watched the crowd move toward the parked cars and was startled when he heard someone speak beside him. He snapped his head in the direction of the passenger seat and watched as a man in prisoner's uniform materialized on the seat. "That is truly pathetic," the prisoner said. "All those bleeding hearts here to save me." He looked at Bart, who was stunned. "Don't they realize I would happily kill each and every one of them?" The apparition laughed as the truck's motor started by itself and shifted into gear. Bart tried to take it out of gear, but it was stuck, and he watched as the truck spun its tires and headed directly for the crowd across the street. "Look out!" he yelled, and began to blare the horn. The people looked up to see him coming, but it was too late. His stomach revolted as he watched bodies disappear under the truck. A young woman holding a protest sign was struck and flew onto the hood. For the brief moment he could see her face, Bart felt her pain and tried to tell her with his eyes that he was sorry. It wasn't his fault. The truck spun to one side, casting her from it and slamming into other people as it left the parking lot. Bart tried to gain control of the vehicle, but it had a mind of its own. He looked over to the passenger seat, and the prisoner there was laughing wildly and gazing at him with a look of pure evil. Bart was scared. He tried to open the door of the truck to escape, but he could not. Looking in the rearview mirror, he was horrified to see the mangled bodies left behind his truck. "Why are you doing this to me?" Bart screamed. "You're dead! Leave me alone!" The invader just laughed as the truck raced down the highway into the night with Bart at the steering wheel where he had no control. His mind was a blur of thought as he tried to explain what was happening to himself. He could not escape from this nightmare from which he had become trapped. The truck came to a stop in front of a department store, and Bart suddenly felt funny. He looked over to the passenger seat, but the prisoner was gone. "I'm right here," he heard himself say. "Now let's go have some real fun." Bart realized the prisoner had taken control of his body. He could see and hear everything around him, but when he tried to talk or control his movements, he could not. He climbed out of the truck and went into the store, heading for the sporting goods section. Once there, he watched his body pick up various guns from the display rack and sight along the barrels. He could not hear the prisoner, or even feel him, only watch the actions his body played out. In his mind, the prisoner spoke to him. "This one should do nicely." He was holding a semi-automatic shotgun and watched as his hands used the gun to break the glass case of ammunition and began to load the gun with buckshot. He knew the power of buckshot because he used it to hunt deer, and he prayed it would not be used on people. Walking across the store, he stalked the aisles looking for prey. In his mind, he could hear the lunatic laughing at the prisoner, but he could not stop what was happening. Suddenly, his head turned and he could see a man and woman walking down the aisle away from him. "Hold it, you two!" he heard himself say, and cringed within as they turned and the man was ripped to shreds by a blast from the shotgun. Blood and gore covered the woman beside him as he was flung down the aisle in his own blood, and she began to scream. "Aw, what's the matter, honey? Did I spoil your date?" he said as he fired a round into her face. He could hear someone on the public address system yelling for everyone to evacuate the store, and prayed that they would. He could not control what was happening, and this only increased his terror. He kept walking the aisles looking for victims. Just as he spotted a woman and child running across the store and resigned himself to witnessing their untimely deaths, someone behind him yelled, "Freeze, mister, or I swear to God I'll put holes in you." He turned to see an armed security guard pointing a gun at him. "Shoot," Bart thought. "Please, end this nightmare." His prayer was unanswered as the guard was punched back from the force of the shot which hit him. Turning to search for more targets, he saw a young girl running away. She was very pretty, and for some reason the lunatic inside him did not shoot. Instead, he watched as his hands grabbed a length of chain from a display and swung it around. The chain flew, spinning quickly down the aisle, skidding across the floor and tangled in her feet, bringing her down. She screamed and tried to regain her feet as the maniac closed in on her. He grabbed her by the hair and jerked her to her feet as he headed for the front door of the store and the night beyond, still carrying the gun and the length of chain. A concerned citizen was waiting outside the door with a pistol when they emerged and fired when they came into view. The shot missed, and before the man could fire again, he was ripped apart by a blast from the shotgun. Bart prayed for an end to this macabre killing spree and a safe escape for the girl, but he knew that was not to be. The maniac threw the girl into the truck and lashed her hands behind her with the chain before putting the seatbelt across her. As he climbed into the other side and drove away, Bart could feel the unending flow of evil from the crazed killer. They drove into the night with no pursuit while Bart thought of the consequences of this night. Surely he would be put to death for the crimes of his captor. Who would believe that he had been possessed by an executed convict? Still unable to gain control of his body, he could only writhe in disbelief in his mind as he watched the lunatic touch the girl. "You're a very pretty girl," he heard the lunatic saying. "I'm going to enjoy having you. It's been 10 long years since I had me a girl, but I think you can make up for it." The sun began to rise over the horizon, and Bart felt the lunatic starting to panic. He had to find someplace to hide away. Frantically looking around as they traveled, he spotted a small hay storage building a little ways back from the highway with no houses in sight. It was just a roof over stacks of hay with open walls, but Bart could feel the lunatic thinking that they could hide within the hay. The truck stopped on the side of the highway where the prisoner grabbed the girl and drug her across the field to the hay. He had been right. There was a small room-like enclosure within the walls made from hay and closed in on 3 sides. He threw the girl into this enclosure and began to pull down hay bales from the far end to shut them in. When he finished and felt somewhat secure, he turned his full attention back to the girl. She had not spoken up to this time, but instead had curled up inside herself, whimpering and crying. "What do you want from me?" she cried. "I'm only 17 and my daddy's going to come looking for me." She cringed back against the hay as he looked at her. "Well, he's just going to have to wait his turn, 'cause I got first dibs on you, sweet thing," he said cruelly as he began to rip her clothes off. She fought as hard as she could, but he merely slapped her hands away and finished taking her clothes. When he was finished, she lay there on the hay as God had made her, and even through his own horror, Bart found himself thinking that God had made her right. The maniac began to grope her body in a way that was not at all sensual. He was like an animal feeling for the softest place to bed down. She cried and begged, but it was no good. This maniac who had taken over his body would do with her as he pleased. Unable to stop the maniac in him, Bart tried to shut out the scenes before him as the maniac raped her and she screamed her protests of violation. When it was finally over, he tried to comprehend the magnitude of what he had witnessed and thought there could surely be no more horror left in this life. He was wrong. Somehow, inside his head, the maniac had sensed his thoughts and told him to prepare for more. With drool falling from his mouth upon the girl, he lowered his face to her. Bart wondered what could possibly be worse and screamed in his mind as the lunatic sunk his teeth into her tender white flesh. Bart could not escape what was happening. There was no way to scream or close his eyes as the lunatic bit harder and harder and started to shake his head from side to side, ripping flesh from the girl. She screamed for what seemed an eternity, and he was thankful when he saw her faint from the pain. The shaking stopped, and with one final pull, the lunatic tore a chunk of flesh from the girl. He began to chew as the blood dripped from his face onto her innocent pale white body. Bart saw the rips in her skin and the yellow fatty tissue beneath which quivered as she breathed. He could not come to grips with what he was seeing. How could anyone hurt another like this? Suddenly, he heard a voice behind him and prayed that he would be free of this monstrosity. The lunatic turned to look at the intruder, swallowing as he did, and Bart saw a gun pointed directly at his face. Apparently, the rancher had seen him come onto his property and come to investigate. At the sight of the bloody man before him, he was clearly repulsed, but fought to control his emotions. "Get away from that girl," he warned, waving the gun menacingly. "Wait your turn," the lunatic said flatly. Bart saw the man's finger tighten on the trigger. A flash erupted from the muzzle of the weapon, and he felt the bullet crash into his skull. His body was flung forcefully away from the girl as he heard the lunatic's scream of rage, and he thanked the Lord as darkness swallowed him. Wow, that possessor dude was a demon. Thank you for spending your time with me. If you like the story, how about giving me a like and consider hitting that subscribe button? Tell me what you think in the comments, and I'll be sure to join the conversation. That's all for tonight, but I'll be back next Friday with another story. So until then, sleep well.